Hi, my name is Brady Forrest. I am the co-founder of Ignite Talks and a Long Now member. Uh, the Long Now is known for giving great or hosting great, amazing talks. And Ignite is kind of a sister organization that's been around since 2006 and is experienced with having lots of short talks. And so back in 2015, we had our first Ignite Long Now collaboration where we had 12 members of the Long Now community get up and do a 5-minute talk. And we've decided to replicate that here today, except virtually because COVID. In case you're not familiar with Ignite, it's a short form format. And each of the speakers you're about to see will get 5 minutes to share their idea, talk about history, to try to inspire you. They will each have 20 slides, and they will each only have 15 seconds per slide. So again, that's a total of 5 minutes. Now, we had over 80 applicants for this set of talks. We have 12 speakers today. There are Ignites that happen around the world, so feel free to apply to any of those for to share your idea, and hopefully we'll do this again sometime with the Long Now. So now I'd like to welcome up our first speaker, Mark Parmelo. He is, most importantly for this talk, a Bay Area native, but he's also a multiple-time founder, and he is going to take us on a walk through Chinatown. Take it away, Mark, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Think about San Francisco in the late 60s and images like this might appear in your head. The Summer of Love, hippies, Timothy Leary, the Grateful Dead, an explosion of youth culture. Chinatown never makes that highlight reel. And yet 3 miles due east from Haight Street, a transformation was happening, centered around a pool hall founded by American-born Chinese gangsters and a Japanese-American gang member from Oakland. They called it Leways, short for legitimate ways. And the mission was to find employment and recreation for the youth of our community. Gangs like the Raiders, the Immortals, ABCs, and FOBs passed through, played pool and pinball, danced, bought and sold drugs, guns, and fireworks, smoked grass, dropped acid, fell in love, raised kids, built community, and tried to change the world. Leways tried to do what had never been done before. And now with society and politics so polarized and divisive, Chinatown and its wisdom and its lessons, so long hidden from view, should be shared. So this is a love story about Chinatown, its past, and what that past could mean for its future. Many of these photos by my friend Jerry Jew have never been seen before. The negatives stashed away in shoe boxes for nearly 60 years. Thank you, Jerry, for trusting me with them. Now, this is not one of Jerry's pictures. He's old, but not that old. These are Chinatown gangsters circa 1892, when Chinatown was 90% men, railroad, laundry, and factory workers who couldn't vote, own land, or marry outside their race. 42 years later, Bruce Lee, born 3 blocks away, managed to do all 3 before passing in 73. 8 years after the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act was finally repealed, and a new wave of Chinese arrived in Chinatown, forming their own gangs, like Peter from the Watching and the Joe Louis Boys. Leways was about transcending beef happening on the streets. Bands of Chinese, whites, and blacks filled Portsmouth Square with the sound of rock and roll and Motown songs like You're Still a Young Man, Suavecito, and I Can't Get Next to You. This was a time when making out in parked cars in broad daylight was cool. To figure out who you are and what you really wanted to be in an America your ancestors have always felt a tenuous love for. A land they embraced but rarely kissed them back. While back in the mainland, Mao's Cultural Revolution annihilated 1,000-year-old norms, while girlfriends of Watching gangsters fall into the center of a women's rights movement and America's own brand of revolution. I think of stories like my buddy, Derek Kwan. Derek saw this picture of himself. He said, "My father, CQ, was a notorious gangster and Leways member. He passed in 98, and mom's not talking, but I do believe I was conceived on top of that pinball machine at Leways." Sometimes CQ would get high, pour me into the 58 Chevy around midnight, rumble 6 blocks to the bottom of Lombard, peel out, burning rubber and sliding, no seatbelt, up the wrong way of that one crooked street, laughing. And it was moments like this I knew he was truly happy. Asians have a long history of swimming upstream against the current in America, going the wrong way up Lombardo rebellion, defiance against a system that for centuries wanted Asian hands for labor, but not our rights for equal treatment. Listen, the truth is, San Francisco Chinatown isn't even supposed to be here. After the 1906 earthquake, City Hall tried to move Chinatown to Hunters Point. Chinatown found ways to stay, transforming into a tourist destination. And this pandemic means Chinatown must reinvent itself again. And I believe the spirit of Leways is exactly what is needed. When the so-called model minority experimented with marijuana and orange sunshine, redefined traditional roles and dreamed dreams bigger than any generation before them. I think of 1969 in the movie Easy Rider, the desire it must have sparked, expansive, boundless potential to venture beyond Chinatown's borders, aspirations so mind-blowingly different than what their parents could imagine. While Hollywood's Mr. Yoshida in Breakfast and Tiffany's, Charlie Chan, Kato, the houseboy, the coolie, stereotypes of Asian man shattered by Bruce Lee and Jerry's pictures. Even in 2020, these dudes still look like the badasses they were and still are today. Think of all this change and the speed of it. How discombobulating this must have felt to their parents and grandparents who wanted to leave revolution behind, not have their children be part of igniting a perilous new one. Leways eventually became radicalized, factionalized, a Red Guard movement, drawing the eyes of the FBI and the wrath of Chinatown's 6 companies. SFPD raids on Leways eventually closed it down forever. There are lessons here too, but I'm telling you, things are bubbling in Chinatown now, again, under the surface. The old folks you pass on Chinatown streets may be the kids in Jerry's photos, now just older and wiser versions. They remember. They still all have a dream for Chinatown to rise again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That was a really amazing dedication to such an awesome neighborhood in SF. When was the last time you were there?
Yesterday. I go there pretty much every day. Awesome. I'm part of the United Peace Collaborative, which patrols the streets, and I also do tours in Chinatown.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing this.
Thank you very much for having me.
And now we're going to talk about how activism brings a better future, or at least a different one. Please welcome Allison Cooper.
Thank you. I'm Allison, and I'm going to talk about how we can change the world with long-term thinking. I want to start with Montreal in 2012. Every night for months and months we marched, endless crowds of students filling the city's arteries every night as the sun went down. And every single night, after rinsing off the tear gas, tired from running through the city, I went to sleep truly deeply feeling in my bones that another world was possible, that this was something important and unprecedented and unstoppable, and that tomorrow everything could be different. For me as a young American student who grew up with the assumption of going into debt for college, when I first heard that Quebec students would go on strike to fight less than 2,000 Canadian dollars in proposed tuition hikes, and further that organizers were demanding that higher education be tuition free, I'll admit at first I was shocked at the absurdity and the grandiosity of that idea. But the unions leading these protests took a longer view forward, imaginations fueled by the potential found in a longer view back. Support for free education grew popular, discussed in the mainstream. I'd only joined in once the movement was underway, without realizing it had actually been in the works for much longer, through a history of previous waves and coalition building that had only just come to a head. Researching Quebec student movement history, I learned that in the 60s, more conservative students commonly called for a tuition freeze, with centrists demanding free tuition, while the progressive call at the time was for students to be salaried. These expansions of what's possible reminded me of a recent seminar about long-term thinking with Dr. Lonnie J. Avi Brooks, describing how queer Afrofuturisms can serve to widen our aperture for the future. Instead of viewing the possibilities the future holds through a narrow straw, limited in our imagination, with a wider view we see how much more could be possible. This insight into the normalization of free higher education 50 years ago, and again in 2012, helped me see how limited my thinking had been. It took me much longer to catch up to those earlier changemakers with wider views when I saw only my more narrow cone of possible futures. A wider aperture could even drive accelerated change and access to these preferable futures. So what other possible futures could we be missing out on with our traditional narrow views? There are bigger visions, better possible worlds that we miss out on without this. How can we get there with to this viewpoint where more is possible? The abolition movement today is a powerful example of widening our collective possible futures window. Abolishing the police and prison industrial complex is shocking to many today, but to propose it, to consider it, and to demand it inherently widens the realm of what's possible for the benefit of all of us. Angela Davis and MARIAME KABA's insights, they of course have led amazing work here, and I've learned so much from it. Their insights on building systems for community safety and harm reduction with the potential to grow until they might make traditional policing obsolete, show that we can build pockets of the future that we want today, functioning alongside and within present systems. Alternatives to policing have been being explored and built by Black activist leaders for well before many white activists like me became aware of the idea at all, like the Black Panthers' work to establish free food systems and other community programs. Black organizers have long set some of the best examples for this kind of world building as a futurist activist tactic. In this way, sometimes the future already actually exists. Recognizing that the present might be wider and more diverse than we thought also widens our lens into the future. And identifying these preferable futures in the world today helps us reset that timeline. Another challenge where we need to incorporate these long view tactics is climate change. This is a still from Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's film project, A Message from the Future, which envisions a near-term future scenario to help us imagine what the ambitious Green New Deal could do. You can't be what you can't see. The Green New Deal, and also the Rewiring America work as well, pushes our apertures by proposing alternative visions for our future. With these frameworks, we're armed with detailed plans to ground further imaginations. Just painting the picture of what's possible helps us widen our apertures too. But I guess we could also do nothing. We've seen in California recently the firsthand effects that this has made all too real. And I think it's clear that this is less preferable, but still a possible future. But this is business as usual, the path of least resistance. Other futures are urgently needed to be imagined to prevent that from happening. Together, these expanded views give us new ideas for futures to work toward. They power the ability to normalize moonshot ideas into the mainstream and provide a platform for expanding experiments today as future solutions. They remind us that for any movement, we need to look back further to understand its deeper vision and further ahead to see its true potential. I'm hoping that these stories can serve as a reminder that long-term thinking in itself can change the world and even help us feel tomorrow, and that there are many different ways to engage with these possibilities. And we can all benefit too from more voices being brought into the conversation. So at its core, any work to identify, imagine, or build better worlds can change the present. Looking further into what's possible allows us to see this wider range, illuminating possible better alternatives that could be filtered out as unrealistic in a shorter view, or preventing us from being distracted by incremental ideas. So another world is possible. Tomorrow it could all be different. I carry that feeling with me from Montreal, that physical sense of shouting in the streets, giving me a real, tangible sense of what's next. Through world building today and long-term thinking forward and back, we have so many possibilities to move toward. Please be in touch if you'd like to talk more about this. Thank you, and I can't wait to build new worlds with you.
Thank you, Allison. What is the world you're trying to build right now?
The one that's not on fire, definitely. Yeah, yeah. I think that there's so much that's already being done that I just have a lot more reading to do.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for sharing this, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Now, our next speaker is previously at the New York Times, now at Google, and is going to share some insights from his most recent trip to Italy.
Thanks. Well, about 8 months ago tomorrow, I was in Siena, Italy, looking at this painting in this room. That was the same day that Italy went into its quarantine just in the north. And the way those two are connected to me is something I want to talk about today inside the context of long wave cultural effects. First, though, you got to see Siena. This is the first landscape painting since the Roman Empire. It's also the first or the last painting since before the Black Death. But Siena has so much more going on than that. In 1260, Siena was a republic. That's the same time this pulpit was carved, reviving Roman sculptural tradition. And in 1310, it wrote the first vernacular constitution, about the same time this 15 by 16 foot altarpiece was developed. So what is going on that makes Siena such a big deal? It's actually globalization from the Mongols, who connect Europe and Asia and have these trade routes. And Siena goes in for luxury goods and banking. You can actually see some silks and some Tartar writing there behind the Virgin and the altarpiece. But it's not like everything's all sweetness and light in the world. There's still mercenary warfare and all kinds of mayhem and around Siena and rebellion in Siena. So this group of rulers, these elites called the Nine, decided they better get some allegory going on, and they hire a painter and they comes up with a plan. And if you strip away the angels, a lot of it's kind of familiar. Wisdom from heaven dispenses justice. The people agree there's a wise ruler, the Nine, and he provides peace. Peace actually sleeps on armor in that picture. What happens if there is no justice? Well, stop me if this seems familiar. There's tyranny. It's a narcissist. He's full of selfishness. He's surrounded by these people who just want to sow discord and violence and make life hell for everyone. It's terrible to live there. And if you're a 14th century Christian, it's worse than that. You're not just in this lonely environment where it's every man for himself. The only way you can live in a world like this is to sin, which means you're going to go to hell forever. That sounds like a really bad deal. What happens if there is justice in the world? Well, it turns out people work together under justice. There's community. And more than that, the 7 arts are revived. What God designed for us to work and find meaning in the world so we can ascend. Even those theatrical dancers are chasing away the worms of melancholy. You can see them there on the gown. Well, good mission statement, the 9, but plague. Comes in 1346, races across Europe, kills like the Dickens, sometimes in just a day, wipes out 30% of the population, sometimes worse in places than others. Take, for example, Siena, which lost 50 to 70% of its population in just a couple of years. In fact, it didn't recover its population until about 1950, which is one reason it's such a great place to visit today. But then let's open the lens a little wider, because the plague doesn't end in 5 years. The plague actually goes for about 350 years, flaring up every generation or so. People are arising and, hearing about these terrible deaths somewhere near them. And this is a long wave effect that changes the consciousness in Europe. You start to see it very soon after, where there's an isolation. Asia is a distant place we're not in contact with anymore. We don't really know what's going on. There's an uncertainty. And out of this, we create this new world of individuals. And it's not all bad, because in the Renaissance, we start celebrating great individual artists, and we thinkers as diverse as Martin Luther and Machiavelli, right against each other 150 years later, are talking about the individual and God, or the individual who's on his own and how that creates the state. And they all have plague stories. Dig deep, everybody's got one. Shakespeare's birthplace lost 20% of his population when he was a baby. He goes on to invent new emotional experiences. Galileo relocates our rock. And Newton's on a plague break when he comes up with gravity, optics, and calculus. Modernity. So there I am, 8 months ago tomorrow, having my dinner and thinking about how all this came together, art and religion and politics. And just a couple days later, something kind of rhymes in history. That's right, COVID. Now, COVID is not the Black Death. It's not lethal like that, but I posit that COVID is happening during a new long wave, what I'd call the age of hyper-awareness, where we have social networks and science and sensors and massive computation, cloud computing, including my boss, insert virtual disclaimer here. We virtualized ourselves inside this pandemic with fascinating and great results. But if we really have hyper-awareness, maybe we can also be aware of history and how we will change our consciousness and be mindful of that. And remember that without peace and justice, tyranny and selfishness rule, and everyone's disconnected. Like, say, if you politicize a disease and we all start fighting with each other. But let's remember the other wall, and how some of the secret to life is to find meaning in work and each other, to find each other essential. Let's bake that into this new long wave of hyper-awareness and hope for the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Quentin. And what is the one takeaway you want everyone to walk away from this talk with?
History rhymes in beautiful ways. We can learn from that.
All right. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm going to welcome our next speaker now. Please welcome Asmara Marek. She is, as the title says, going to be sharing the future of storytelling. Take it away.
Thank you. I'm a filmmaker, writer, film professor, and founder of Kinovat.com, an online digital film studio. I'm here to talk about the future of storytelling. My name is Asmara. I love my name as a child because it was listed in the thick dictionary we had. It was there because it is a city and happened to be in bold at the top as a search heading. That made me feel important. There's a story about my name that comes from Tigrinya. It means Arba'ate Asmara, which means the 4 are united. The story goes that the male leaders of 4 villages were fighting. The women came together and calmed tensions by creating the capital city of Asmara. They united the 4. I am named after that city, which lies high in the mountains of East Africa. I'll share with you my thoughts about storytelling. First about storytellers, then about technology, and finally the media industry. My thoughts about the future, paradoxically, are grounded in the past and the natural world. There are 4 directions on the compass and 4 elements in nature. Earth symbolizes stability, water, our subconscious, air, the mind, and fire, action and change. A Hopi prophecy symbolized by this medicine wheel says that long ago, the Great Spirit gathered the peoples of this earth together and said, I'm going to send you to 4 directions and change you to 4 colors. I'll give you special teachings. To the red people, I give guardianship over the earth. To the black people, over water. To the yellow people, guardianship over air. And the white people, guardianship over fire. When you come back together, you will share these so that you can live and have peace on earth, and a great civilization will come about. If you do not share, not only will human beings have a hard time, but almost the earth itself will die. The animated series Avatar depicts a version of this tale, a world that is out of balance with the Fire Nation having too much power. So my first point about the future of storytelling is that it has to be inclusive, not as a favor or out of pity to anyone left out, but as an urgent necessity to create a comprehensive global knowledge system. For example, I'm in California right now and concerned I might miss this talk because my power could be cut off to avoid another massive fire. Years ago, settlers in this area banned Native American tribes from performing controlled burns, which cleaned forests, thus preventing large-scale wildfires. This practice took thousands of years to develop. It is part of our overlooked knowledge system, and we need it now. Next, I would like to speak with you about technology, which some fear is burning out of control, and the future of storytelling. The term Luddite refers to someone who opposes technological advancements. The word comes from a band of English workers who destroyed machinery, especially textile mills, because they feared the machines would take their jobs. Now, we know that technology usually creates new jobs, just different kinds of them. Today, we fear robots taking over and humans becoming surplus. We are anxious that social media is a nexus of misinformation and distortion, bringing the downfall of not only democracy, but even human decency. In the film The Red Desert, directed by Antonioni, the main character anxiously wanders around barren landscapes haunted by the loud sound of machinery painted in audacious colors. Film critics said it showed the problems of industry, but Antonioni said, you don't quite understand. The problem is not the machines. The problem is the humans who have not yet adapted. We can't solve global problems with national structures, and we need technology to unite the global community. We don't need to fear an upgrade of tech as much as we need to upgrade ourselves. We must evolve spiritually, emotionally, and psychologically to make use of new and emerging technological tools to better ourselves and society and to share our local stories internationally. As for the industry, the business of storytelling, particularly finance, is changing through blockchain technology. Film productions have followed the same globalization path of other industries, going abroad for tax incentives, so that where the story takes place has little or no relation to where it is filmed or whose story it is. This has to change. We need local hubs of storytelling. We need to develop global financial structures that create equitable pay for everyone in the industry. We need to respect the story itself, the author, and the people who live these stories, to tell stories with integrity, empathy, and compassion, to think that, well, maybe the Indians aren't the bad guys fighting to protect the land for themselves. Maybe they are fighting to protect it for everybody, including you. So to summarize, the future of storytelling is inclusive, it is high-tech, it is empathetic. It operates on a higher spiritual, psychological, and emotional plane than where we are now. It is time to unite the 4 directions, the 4 corners, and the 4 peoples of the earth. The 4 are united. Arba'ate Asmara. I recently learned that Asmara also means love in Malay from Sanskrit. So let's unite the 4, and let's do it with love. Thank you.
Thank you, Asmara. And one of the things I like about your talk is that it is a talk about storytelling and packed as an example of how to do an amazing story. So how did you select your opening gambit that pulls us all in?
With my name, or you mean the Hopi prophecy?
Your name.
I guess it just came intuitively, actually. And I've been fascinated by that Hopi story. And I actually never realized this link that the 4 are united is also the Hopi story, and that it happened in Eritrea, which is where my father was born. So that was a new discovery for me that inspired me to share.
Well, thank you very much for giving the talk today and being with us.
Thank you so much.
Now, our next speaker is an artist, but her medium is very different from most artists anyway. Please welcome Catherine Chalmers.
Thank you. My multimedia American Cockroach project, which includes photography, 5 short films, drawing and sculpture, was a 10-year investigation into our adversarial relationship with nature. Yes, I raised cockroaches for 10 years because I could think of few animals more hated than the roach. Yet for me, it was a conduit to the negative and often violent tendencies we have towards the animal world. Paraplaneta americana, the most common domestic roach species, is no longer found in the wild. It has moved in with us. I documented the roach's life, eating, drinking, sex, birth, molting, in its now native habitat, our home. As with all my projects, I work with the animal's natural behavior. They are my collaborators. I watch, respond, experiment, and adjust. Through this back and forth process, my artwork takes shape. How do you work with a cockroach? How do you navigate the same space without mutual terror and chaos? You think we hate them, they are wildly afraid of us. It's possible to frighten a roach to death. 10 minutes in a state of panic, and it can die of the equivalent of a roach heart attack. Did early Homo sapiens find the cockroach as detestable as we do now? Certainly they had more dangerous animals to fear. I think our hatred of the roach has grown as we increasingly wall ourselves off from the natural world. Trespassers will be prosecuted. What are the aesthetics of our empathy towards animals? Would we like the cockroach better if it had spots like a ladybug? Or was fuzzy like a bumblebee? Or was donned with colorful feathers like a bird of paradise? People seem to prefer animals that are soft and furry, as opposed to hard and shiny. Animals with big eyes, as opposed to thin antennae. But what do these qualities have to do with the animal's importance to the ecosystem? It points to the subjectivity, perhaps arbitrariness, of how we think about animals in general. Yet these aesthetic preferences have real consequences. All cultures have systems for classifying and organizing the natural world, and such rankings are rarely neutral or objective. These taxonomies determine our emotional response towards different species, and even entire classes of creatures. They also underlie our many environmental policies. My cockroaches were disguised as insects in a garden, looking pretty, pollinating flowers, the idealized vision of nature. But most insects are predators, savagely ripping apart fellow insects. Or in the case of the cockroach, recycling waste and debris. Humans have a bias against scavengers, and that the American cockroach can successfully scavenge off of us further fuels our hatred of them. And what we don't like, we tend to kill, though not usually by hanging, a gas chamber, burning at the stake, or electric chair. Death ties us to the roach in a unique way. We kill them, they survive. We kill ourselves, they survive. My executions were enacted with already dead bugs. This series is not about the suffering humans have endured at the hands of humans, but what other species have endured because of us. It's easy to heap abuse on creatures whose lives are alien and whose biology and behaviors seem bizarre and decidedly non-mammalian. Yet without insects, the terrestrial ecosystem would crash in a matter of months. And how do we repay them for supporting us? By hating them. The cockroach is emblematic of the questions we face as we struggle to decipher our relationship to the animal world in general. What do we love? What do we kill? What do we save? And what goes extinct? My artistic career has been focused on one central issue: how to confront and challenge our human-centric point of view. We have been drawing lines in the sand forever. Maybe now, at the dawn of the Anthropocene, is a good time to reconsider those divisions and what lives on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And what is your art looking like now in COVID?
I'm working with the bark beetle and fire, two systems that are out of balance in the forests of the American West. So I'm actually further removed from COVID because I'm out in the forests in Idaho usually.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being with us here today.
Thank you.
Now, our next speaker is gonna share why we should care about the oceans. Oh, wait a minute. No, sorry. We had like a small mistake. We're having some back-end difficulties. Our next speaker is gonna talk about concrete. Please welcome Jason.
Hello, everybody. Over 10,000 years ago, humans began to live in settled societies. And ever since then, we've needed to build structures to house ourselves, to store our goods, to honor the gods. Earthen construction is fairly easy, but not very strong. Wood is better, but it tends to catch fire. Brick and stone are stronger still, and they're fireproof. But how do we build with them? We can't just stack them up. We need to stick them together. We need some sort of rock glue, an adhesive that's as strong as stone itself. Or, as long as I'm dreaming, why not a liquid rock that we could just pour into molds and make in any shape we wanted? Well, this futuristic sci-fi technology actually exists today. In fact, it's been around for millennia. It's called cement. You probably think cement is boring. I am here to convince you that it is pure magic. How does it work? Well, it is actually one of the oldest crafts. Cement is older than pottery, older than metalworking, probably even older than agriculture. Cement floors were found at this agricultural site in Turkey, Göbekli Tepe, from 9600 BC. Cement begins with limestone, a sedimentary rock formed from crushed seashells. So the main ingredient in limestone is calcium carbonate. When you burn it, it gives off CO2 and leaves behind calcium oxide. Calcium oxide is a caustic powder. If you touch it, it will burn you. If you pour water into it, it gives off heat in an exothermic reaction. In fact, enough to boil the water. The result of leaving behind the water in the calcium oxide is called slaked lime or hydrated lime. And if you pour that into a mold and let it open to the air for a little while, it will absorb CO2 from the air and set as hard as stone. The lime cycle is complete. The powder has turned back into rock. Now, a pure lime cement like this isn't very strong, but if you add sand, it makes a mortar that you can use to stick bricks together. If you also add pebbles and gravel, you get concrete, which can be poured into a mold. But we can make an even better cement. The ancient Romans discovered that if you add volcanic ash to the lime, you get a cement that will set even underwater, very useful for making harbors. This cement uses a different chemistry, by the way, which we don't fully understand today. The Romans were masters of concrete. They used it to build the aqueducts, the Colosseum, the Pantheon. And of course, all these structures stood for 2,000 years. They're still around today. In the 1700s, the Eddystone Lighthouse was rebuilt by John Smeaton, a father of civil engineering, using a variation on the Roman formula. It stood for over 100 years and was retired only when the rock underneath it began to erode. But we can make an even better cement. If you get your kiln hot enough when you're firing the lime and silica, the result will form very hard nodules called clinker. These are very hard to grind, so they were originally discarded as a waste product. But if you do grind them, the resulting powder is a cement that is stronger than any other formula. It's called Portland cement, and it's still the main type in use today, ever since it was invented in the 1800s. Now, all of these cements have a drawback. They have a lot of compressive strength, but they don't have a lot of tensile strength. This is why the Romans built with mostly domes and arches. The round shape of the arch directs forces into compression along the arch. The medieval builders did a similar thing. They used the pointed Gothic arch, which can stretch even higher than the round Roman ones. To prop up the high walls of their cathedrals, they used the flying buttress, all this making up for the deficiencies of the concrete. But today, we can do even better. With modern technology, we can combine concrete with another material that has high tensile strength, namely steel. The combination of the two is called reinforced concrete, and those reinforcing bars are called, naturally enough, rebar. There is a drawback. Reinforced concrete does not last nearly as long. The steel inside it eventually rusts no matter how well you seal it away, giving it a lifetime of only about 50 to 100 years. Compare this, of course, to the 2,000 years of the Roman concrete. But it's a trade-off. With reinforced concrete, we can build structures unlike anything the Romans could build, such as the cantilevered decks of Falling Water or the elegant half-shell of the Sydney Opera House. That is cement. We crush and burn rock, extract its powdered essence, and then reconstitute it later in any shape we choose. Like coffee or instant pancake mix, it is instant stone. Just add water. Thanks, everybody. I'm Jason Crawford.
Hey, thank you for being here, Jason. What inspired you to talk about concrete? What structure made you want to dive in?
I research concrete because it is one of the most important building materials, and I just found it to be this thing that, you know, we would consider it absolutely futuristic if it didn't already exist. You know, liquid rock that you can just pour into a mold, and it's you know, essential for civilization.
All right, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thanks.
All right, Denise. I think of all of our speakers, I've known you longest. You are an open source maven, and unsurprisingly, you are here to talk about open source in a time of COVID. So thank you both for your work and for sharing your thoughts.
Thanks. Yes, I am, although that my title is not exactly what I'm talking about. So about 3 years ago, I moved to Ireland. I did this because of what was happening in my life. So as Brady said, I have spent pretty much a lifetime now working on open source and some very important projects. This is where my office is now. It's, as you can see, a resort town, not a normal place for a tech office. And I went to work for this company, at least in part, because it was here and the CEO wanted to stay where he was born. But through no fault of our own, we ended up writing the most popular COVID tracing app, contact tracing app in the world. And so this presentation is about how you can't ultimately change what happens to you. Life just happens and you have to go with what you know. I've had wanderlust my whole life. This is Morocco. I lived in Morocco for 2 years while I was in the Peace Corps right out of college. I've lived a lot of places and a lot of really pretty places that weren't America. And at some point I realized that you could travel full time if you just got interested in open source. And there are a few of us, some of us in the audience now, that spent about 10 years traveling full time to make open source real by evangelizing it around the world. And it was really fun, but the truth is my houseplants looked like this the whole time. I was so often gone and not home, it was kind of silly even to have a home. And I decided, and maybe this is wrong, that I could change my life by moving elsewhere, and maybe finding a little more peace, realizing that you know, software isn't always as important as we think it is. It's not world peace. It's certainly not super important to humanity most of the time. So as I said before, I moved to beautiful Ireland, and it was peaceful. And I loved it so much. For 2.5 years, it was exactly what I was looking for, although I was still traveling too much. And then, of course, we had, you know, the pandemic. And boy, it stopped everything. In fact, Ireland just today decided they're stopping again because they need to flatten their curve again. They don't have enough hospital resources, so they have to stay on top of that flattening. So, you know, we wanted to work on the contact tracing app because we wanted to help people get back to something like a normal life and not have to stay far away from each other with fear. And, you know, I'm not opposed to masks. I think they're great, but we need ways for people to feel safe. And moreover, when we wrote our app, we wrote it privacy first, like I have never done before. It's a very small data set. It doesn't know who you are or where you are, but it's still able to help you protect yourself and your family, which is amazing to me. We added a lot of features that the European Union didn't want us to add, like symptom trackers. They wanted that to be a separate app, but we thought, if we don't put it all in one app, how are we going to get people to use all these different bits? And this turned out to be a really useful feature. This one was even more useful. It's information about where more cases are, so that you can make choices about where to spend your summer. And a lot of people use this. I mean, we have the best penetration of any contact tracer in the world, almost 40% of our population. Part of why that happened was because we used open source. We open sourced the code base so that privacy advocates could look at it before we tried to get people to use it. And they became our biggest advocates. And that's why we have such a big install base. Then after we released it and got such a great response, we started worrying about our neighbor to the north, Northern Ireland. Of course, those 6 counties are behind a border that almost 30,000 people cross over every day. And the UK was taking a different tack. So we asked them if they would use our app, and they said yes. And in fact, most of the UK is using our app now, just not the UK itself, or what we think of as Britain, but Scotland, Gibraltar, the Isle of Jersey, Northern Ireland. And then we were able to get people to use it in the US as well. So right now, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware are all using this app that was crafted in Ireland. And that is a huge change for Ireland to have influence like that in the world. The biggest thing that happened was we got asked to give it to the Linux Foundation Public Health Initiative. And we did do that. It's called COVID Green. And the reason that that's important is people who are not going to pay our company to create a bespoke version will still be able to use this simple technology to combat something that's frankly changing all of our worlds, and not in a good way. And what I'm most focused on is Africa, and needing to get them the tools. The reason that they don't show any COVID is not because they don't have it, it's because they're not tracking it. So my takeaway for you today is, if you have the opportunity to download a COVID tracing app to use in your locale, and California is about to have that opportunity, use it. And if you don't have an app, go to COVID Green and try to get your local public health initiative interested in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. And what is the California app going to be called?
You know, it's being tested right now. I was at UCSF this morning, and all the nurses were using it, and I think it's called Cover California. But I think they're also still working on the name of it. But it's been made by Google and Apple, and it's not as fancy as our app. It's much more single use. But for the purposes of knowing who you've talked to if you fall ill, it's the way to go. And it is written with the same privacy ideas in mind. So,
all right. And so, well, thank you again.
Check your Apple store, your Google store. It will show up very shortly here.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Denise, for both the work you do and for being here today.
Thanks for the opportunity.
All right. Our next speaker is going to talk about why we want to keep the oceans around, and more importantly, the fish within them. All right. Thank you very much, Lewis. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Lewis Metzger, and I really thank you for the opportunity. Tonight I'm going to talk about how our future drugs will come from the oceans, and hopefully make for you a selfish case for protecting ocean biodiversity. So this biodiversity is threatened by everything from coral bleaching to plastic accumulation to the mining of seabed metal nodules to things like the oil spill that recently happened in Mauritius. Evolved chemistry in the oceans and elsewhere is one of humanity's greatest assets, whether it be sponges that make potentially anti-cancer compounds or enzymes that have evolved to do green chemistry. So nature's chemistry is encoded by DNA. So organisms, via their DNA, RNA, and proteins, encode chemistry, and this chemistry evolves with the organism. And ocean organisms encode their own chemistry. Fewer than 90% of ocean species have even been identified, and far fewer of that have been carefully characterized. So what sort of drugs might lurk in the deep, and what sorts of molecules might we lose if we lose species diversity? A good example would be compounds from cone snail venom. Here a cone snail is stunning a fish as it envelops it with its stomach. This venom has evolved over deep time in cone snails. And one of these venom components has been used to make a non-opioid pain drug called ziconotide. And if you look at the three-dimensional rendering on the far right of the slide, you'll see that this is a very shapely molecule. More on that later. Halocondrin B, this elaborate molecule isolated from a sponge, was used to make the drug eribulin, and this is a treatment for metastatic breast cancer. It's been successful. Fucoidins are molecules that have recently been shown from brown algae to inhibit SARS-CoV-2 viral entry into mammalian cells in the laboratory. So this might be a starting point for therapeutics. Alginates are polymers that are found in algae that are used traditionally in wound dressings, but they're now being used as scaffolds to grow new cells for regenerative medicine. Sponges inspired nucleoside analogs that were used to develop drugs. AZT, the first effective HIV therapy, was derived from these nucleoside analogs, as is valacyclovir used for herpes. Nucleoside analogs from sponges also led to the development of cytarabine, and this is a drug that was a game changer in the treatment of certain types of leukemia, really increasing survival rates. Cyclomarins are anti-infectives discovered from an ocean bacterium in the Bahamas, and some types of them seem to kill the bacteria that causes tuberculosis. Others target a parasite causing malaria. Rampamycin was discovered in coastal soil on Easter Island. Originally, it was an antifungal, but it's now a very important drug for immunosuppressant anti-rejection drugs, and it's used to prevent organ rejection in transplant patients. So the ocean has many gradients: temperature, light, nutrients, salinity, gases, pressure, and more. And these act upon the organisms that live there over deep time to result in really unique chemistry. And the evolution of organisms, I should emphasize, is evolution of chemistry. DNA via RNA via proteins encodes chemistry, and as organisms evolve, their chemistry evolves. And the reproduction of the conditions of this evolution is difficult. Nature's chemistry is special because natural molecules have handedness. Acetaminophen doesn't, but rifampicin on the right with the hatch marks shows points of handedness. And this handedness leads to shapeliness. So rifampicin is shown in red, rendered in a space-filling model. Because of these points of handedness, it fits into an enzyme that is a drug target, shown in blue. And this is a feature of natural drugs. So many of these natural compounds are the type of compounds that a medicinal chemist wouldn't dream of, but have evolved in nature. And if we lose species diversity, we lose chemistry that we won't rediscover. So my takeaway is the oceans contain medicinal treasures that evolved in deep time and under unique conditions. And once lost, they may never be rediscovered. So preserving biodiversity is really self-preservation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Lewis. And where do you see medicine, if we lose the ocean?
Well, I mean, it's an enormous source of biodiversity. Certainly there is a biodiversity on land, but we need every molecular handle we can get to discover new drugs, especially for anti-infectives. So it would be very tragic, and it's hard to put a price on that.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today. Hopefully we won't lose the ocean or its biodiversity.
Thank you.
Take care. All right. Our next speaker is an artist visiting us from New York. Take it away, Madeline.
Welcome to the 10,000-Year Mystery, my series of oil paintings about a marking system for communication over a 10,000-year time span. Here's some background for the paintings. We need a marking system to warn future generations about the long-term danger of nuclear waste storage sites, like this one in New Mexico. Think of science fiction novels that take place in the far future, when people are trying to make sense of our civilization's artifacts. One challenge of long-term communication is the drift of meaning, both linguistic and symbolic. Axial precession, another change over time, will be the position of the stars in a 26,000-year cycle. This is a good language-free way for us to communicate about the passage of millennia. Here's an example. On the left are the stars in New Mexico as seen now in the year 2000. On the right are the stars as they will appear there in the year 4000. The difference shows the passage of time over just 2,000 years. I make sky map stencils by punching guide holes, then I use those to accurately mark the star positions on the canvas. This painting is called We Left. Part of the warning text reads, "The waste is from nuclear weapons we made. The weapons are gone, but the danger endures." Transferring maps onto canvas has been a challenge. Here, I take the clear plastic film over a reverse printed topographic map. I applied oil paint to the contour lines of the map and then flipped it over onto the canvas, making an accurate print of the topographic map. That's those blobby rainbow lines, and the green dots with yellow centers are the stars. The weapons are gone, but the danger endures. We left this message here for you. We left this here for you. We left. Mule deer. This painting combines an aerial view mineral map with a horizon view sky map. I use a technique called gridding up to transfer the map shapes to the canvas. I numbered the squares on the map and on the canvas, then referred to the map as I painted in the shapes square by square. The deer's hoof prints mark the star locations. Just as deer leave tracks and trails, civilizations leave tracks and trails for the far future. I assigned the false colors to the mineral map in such a way that it also functions as a traditional vertical landscape view, with the deer looking out at us. Desert raven. This is a map of magnetic anomalies of the Earth. Some bird species use these magnetic fields for navigation. The bumpy warning text on the left is buried under the matte paint, as you can see on the right, giving a sense of physical degradation of a warning message over time. The raven shape reminds me of a warplane. The New Mexico site is for the waste from nuclear weapons, research, and production. Oracle bone Chinese. I really want to do some paintings with this. I've translated the nuclear waste warning message into this 3,600-year-old language. It's another way to convey linguistic drift over time. 10,000 years in the past was the dawn of agriculture, so long-term future thinking can be mind-boggling. But as you've just seen, long-term thinking can also be enjoyable. I'd like to thank the Long Now Foundation and Ignite for giving us this forum in which to do that thinking, and I'd like to thank you all for being here this evening.
Thank you very much, Madeline, for being here and sharing your paintings. It reminds me of, both the mote in God's eye, in which civilizations keep falling and they're constantly being reminded of their nuclear powers and the world's knowledge, and also the foundation. So thank you.
Thank you, Brady.
All right. And our next speaker is kind of going to ruminate on time and share a project he's been working on. Please welcome Scott Thrift.
Time is funny, but not ha-ha funny. Peculiar. Like, how many times in the past 6 months have you thought to yourself something like, wait, where did the time go? What day is it again? 9 years ago, I was having some of the same frustrations. I was super busy, as we all like to say, but I was beginning to feel like I only lived in yesterday or in between alerts. I wanted more time to be present, to live in the moment, even though I had no idea how to do that. So what is time's problem? I felt uniquely qualified to figure that out because I had become an expert at exploring time as a video editor, speeding time up, slowing time down, making time more valuable. And then I asked the question that changed my life. How can we live in the moment when the moment changes every second? The problem with time is that there isn't enough of it. To get to know time better, we're going to need a longer now. Instead of making time as a filmmaker, I began to develop a series of analog timepieces that could help myself and others enrich our awareness of time. Because there is an uncharted territory within us all. And that is your individual temporal bandwidth. How long is your now? If we only see time as a man-made contraption, our temporal bandwidth remains thin, forging a tenuous and fragmented experience of life. Isn't this one of the gifts of the 10,000-year clock? Besides bringing us all together here, now, it stretches our collective temporal bandwidth to a beacon 10,000 years ahead. And that perspective is vital because it shows us where we are now. And where we are now is that we live in the long-term effects of short-term thinking. How do we get to the part where we live in the long-term effects of long-term thinking? Well, there has never been a better time than right now to find out. I believe that it is possible for us to change the times we live in. All we have to do is change the time we live in so that we can say with certainty that that was then and this is now, the present. You are looking at the trio of timepieces, collectively known as the present, that I have created to solve the problem of not having more time in this life. By tuning our awareness to the perennial cycles of the day, the moon, and the year, we can collectively rediscover the original nature of time and a longer now. The present day is inspired by the view of time on Earth from the window of an airplane. This 24-hour numberless clock guides you through a spacious meditation on dawn, noon, dusk, and night, a generous companion to the relentless precision of industrial time. Inspired by the design challenge of modernizing the ancient yin-yang symbol, the present moon guides you through a 29.5 day span of shadow and light that is the lunar cycle, with the full moon at the top and the empty moon at the bottom. Inspired by the breathtaking suchness of being alive on Earth, the present year spans 365 days, gradually upgrading your depth awareness of time by presenting a holistic point of view on the nature of change itself. The present invites us to be the first generation in this century to consciously enrich our temporal bandwidth and turn the page on how we read the story of time. The story of time as we know it is still stuck in the industrial era. But hey, look at where we get to go together. We have the chance right now to co-create a new understanding of time that guides our thinking and behavior into greater harmony with nature. And don't worry, industrial time isn't going anywhere. It's an incredibly useful tool to help us be on time. We don't want to lose that, but we also don't want to focus so closely on it that we never learn what it's like to be in time. You see, me and thousands of other people in 42 countries have been living with the present for many years now. And we know that it does what we hoped it would do. The present gives time space for a longer now. Advancing our ability to read time while expanding our temporal bandwidth to make room for the big ideas and the long-term solutions to all of the current problems that we've invented with short-term thinking. As long as we rely solely on short-term devices to tell the story of time,
We banish ourselves from the subtleties of the natural world and unconsciously limit the boundaries of the human experience. With the present, it no longer has to be that way.
Thank you very much, Scott. And when are they going to ship?
Excuse me?
Thank you very much, Scott.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you.
Now, our next speaker was instrumental in designing the 10,000-year clock. Please welcome Stuart Dixon.
Thank you, Brady. Can you hear me? These are my institutional affiliations. You can contact me at sdixon@wolfram.com or sdixon@mum.edu. I'm going to tell you a semi-autobiographical story about how I helped Danny Hillis create the equation of time cam for the clock of the long now. In 1996, I was working on the dinosaur production about across the street from where Danny was a Disney corporate fellow at Imagineering. He was designing the clock around this time, just getting started. He had seen my illustrations in the second edition of the Mathematica book. And so he said that I was the only one he could think of who could make a machine part from a mathematical equation. So the problem of keeping accurate time for 10,000 years, one idea is a solar synchronizer. The problem is the solar synchronizer sees sundial time, which needs a calendrical calculation to convert to like atomic clock time. So the analemma is the position of the sun in the sky at the same time of day for a year. And it's because the Earth axis is tilted, and it gets even worse because the equation of time morphs over the period of 26,000 years with the precession of the equinoxes. So Danny gave me a Mathematica notebook with the equation of time in it. Oh yeah, the right-hand side of this slide is an analemma sundial that has the conversion. It's the offset between local solar time and absolute time. You can interact with the equation of time cam in the Wolfram demonstrations project, and that really brings it home a lot better than just still pictures here. But here are some still frames from the equation of time demo. You can see how the equation of time morphs over, this is an expanse of 12,000 years that's cast onto the cam for the clock. So how do we turn this into a physical thing? In 1996, we used stereolithography or laminated object manufacturing. Computer-aided manufacturing applied to a mathematical equation. So this is the 1989 first advertisement for Mathematica, and it's executable code that looks like mathematics from an academic text. And here's the computer-aided manufacturing part is making a displaced surface with an edge on it that can enclose material, because mathematically thin surfaces can't be physically built. And so I came up with a data structure to do this. It associates faces with edges and edges with faces. So you can do the mesh displacement. You can get consistent normals and do the mesh displacement. I wrote a paper in 1990 that was never published, but Andrew Glassner published winged edge models in Graphics Gems 2 the next year, so it got published. Here is some Mathematica code for the iconic Calabi-Yau manifold, and the right-hand side of the slide is the traditional form of the same thing, as you would see it typeset in MathML or something like that. And so here's the Mathematica graphic of the Calabi-Yau manifold, along with a stereolithograph of the Calabi-Yau manifold. Natural mathematics compiled into a 3D surface. The equation of time mathematics you can download from the Wolfram demonstrations project, and it really doesn't look much better in the calendrical calculations book than it looks right here. And so what I did in 1996 was some fairly crude computer-aided manufacturing to turn it into an STL file. And then Danny did the casting to turn it into a machine part for the first prototype. And it's on display at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich, England. So it's an iconic object in its own right now. And here's just another plug for my employer. Stephen Wolfram is doing fundamental physics again, and I think it's really cool. And it's an open project. Anybody can join and contribute to the to finding the fundamental theorem of physics in computation. And thanks to the Long Now Foundation and Brady for allowing me to be here.
It was my pleasure, and thank you for sharing your illustrious career. What are you working on now?
I'm in charge of the back-end data feeds for Wolfram Alpha, and I'm doing geometry sculpture for the Larry Spring Museum of Common Sense Physics in Fort Bragg.
Wow. Well, thank you for being here today, and look forward to seeing you at our next one.
Thank you.
Take it away.
This is a story about the end of reality. Not the end of the world, but the end of the idea of one consensus world. Diving in, let's nod to Alan Watts, who once said, "There's no sense in clinging to the rocks that are falling with you." Fictions make us human, and always have. Starting 40,000 years ago with the Leways sculpture, a lion-headed man carved from mammoth bone, we've lived in our imaginations. Reality only exists in contrast with, and has always required, the unreal. In the last few hundred years, we've moved from trust and hearsay in recordings as photography and phonography matured and became admissible as court evidence, allowing us to get strangely lazy about what it is we consider authentic. Philosopher Regina Rini of York University calls this the epistemic backstop. It's part of what has allowed us to scale social coordination from local networks to a global economy. But it's a prosthetic that has eroded other vital capabilities. Over the last few years, thanks to NVIDIA, Adobe, Google, OpenAI, and others, we've seen an explosive evolution of machine learning tools that produce real-seeming but fraudulent synthetic media. By now, most people have seen BuzzFeed's Jordan Peele Barack Obama deepfake, or the countless Mark Zuckerberg and Vladimir Putin deepfakes. And it's clear how easily these could be deployed and will be deployed as political weapons. But there are subtler issues with apps like Zao and Reface, which let you put your own face into movies and music videos, democratizing this for masquerade, but opening an attack vector for identity theft. Synthetic video is concerning, but vocal forgery may be even more worrisome because fewer people are aware of how sophisticated it has gotten. In my 2017 sci-fi short story, An Oral History of the End of Reality, I imagined how you may one day soon risk having your voice stolen simply by answering the phone. The escalating arms race between forgery and forensics is really just a continuation of the forces that drove humankind to pioneer modern science in the first place. After all, the more perspectives in agreement, the better. There is a silver lining here in that this undercuts our arrogance, bringing scientific rigor home to roost and forcing us to ask sophisticated questions about our confidence in so-called facts. New conceptions of reality will be far more nuanced and multidimensional than those of the present day. But for now, the threats are apocalyptic, and new literacy is desperately needed. Only a few projects, such as Michael Morgenstern's I Dared My Best Friend to Ruin My Life, have emerged to help people understand how to navigate these vertiginous new social landscapes. But lying is nothing new, and people have always abused trust. It's already the case that world powers act as if reality is what you make it. Just look at the explosion of fake news. Our conceit that recordings are more trustworthy than hearsay is a huge exploit in the code of society. Collective action problems require a narrative cohesion to weave the social fabric of our future, and the manufacture of convincing counterfeits is a kind of black magic. by all accounts, it's fair to say that information warfare is magical warfare, which means the end of the modern hubris of naive realism and requires us to reclaim some aspects of pre-modernity. Living in the future may ultimately feel more like living in a world of an indigenous cosmology, in which the imaginal is on equal ontological footing with the physical world. Which brings us to the pragmatism of fiction. Most of the brain doesn't differentiate between the real and the unreal, which is why fiction is so powerful, why first theater and now cinema have held such power over us. Visualization exercises are a mainstay of wisdom traditions worldwide, an ancient tool to develop and internalize our highest potentials. The modern world is simply waking up to the instrumental nature of fictions as a force for shaping collective behavior. For instance, artist Stephanie Lepp's project Deep Reckonings makes explicit deepfakes of powerful abusers taking responsibility for their actions, helping us imagine what it would look like for them to assume accountability and maybe even moral leadership. Other projects like Dali Lives bring history back to life. MIT's Deep Empathy motivates human rights action by showing us ruined versions of privileged cities, putting the affluent in the shoes of those suffering from global catastrophe. Deepfakes can help us imagine better versions of ourselves, much like the established use of mirrors in physical therapy to trick the brain into imagining wounded body parts as whole. The fact is, we have always lived in our imagination, and reality is the most pernicious and dangerous fiction of them all. Deepfakes may make it harder for us to agree on which myths we should act on, but the real world was always a mirage, and we only stand to gain by leaving it behind. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I mean, it reminds me of a Lewis Clark quote: "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic."
Indeed, I wrote an essay on how the future is indistinguishable from magic. You can find it on my Medium account. Yeah.
All right. And which of these technologies scares you the most?
The oral history of the end of reality was entirely about vocal synthesis at first, and then trailing into haptics. I think haptics is actually the kind of the scariest thing. If you look at the work that was patented recently by Disney Imagineering, the idea of being able to reproduce someone's touch with like sophisticated robotics, I think is really the one that creeps me out the most.
Yeah, that reminds me of a scene from a Jack Ryan book, Cardinal of the Kremlin, when the person is trapped in an immersion tank and then tortured over 30 hours. If haptics were useful for that, that'd be pretty nightmarish. Well, on that pleasant note, thank you very much for being with us today. And now I'm going to welcome on the executive director of The Long Now, Xander Rose.
Hey.
Hey, Xander.
This was so fantastic, Brady. Thank you and your crew. I know what a monumental effort is to wrestle all the cats into the right format. So this was really fantastic.
Well, thanks for teaming up with us. It was super fun, and the caps were great.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so many themes. You know, the concrete. You know, actually, one of the great the people who studies the multi-thousand-year-old concrete from Rome is right here in the Bay Area and at UC Berkeley, who we've worked with on the clock project. Those kind of Vesuvian concretes were figured out for some of the nuclear waste repositories, so that kind of has good echoes to that project. But also just to be able to see old friends like Scott Thrift and Denise and Stuart and Catherine, even it's been a long time since being able to see you all in person. So. And then also seeing some new members. And our goal is to make this an annual tradition of bringing our members more forward, and so that we can hear some of these great stories. So we did it the first time at the first member gathering a few years ago, which you organized. So I'm loving this as a tradition that we keep doing. So hopefully other members are listening and can prepare their talks for next year.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll be here. And thank you, Audra. And if anyone wants to speak at Ignite SF, we'll be doing some more virtual ones. And thank you very much, Xander.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.